Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this conversation about getting buy-in for a talent intelligence platform. My name is Steve Feyer. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold AI, and I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce two fantastic talent leaders. I want to start with SteFan PremDas, Head of Talent Operations for Noom Inc. I also want to introduce our other panelist, who is Jeff Schlosser, the Head of Talent at Granular. Thank you for being here. Our conversation is about technology to support talent acquisition, and specifically about how to bring in AI. The common thread with Jeff and SteFan here is that you both have brought in talent acquisition AI in multiple fast-growing companies. So you both are really the world's experts on how to drive this specific kind of change in your organization. So we want to hear some of your advice on how others can do it. So I'd like to address the topic first to Jeff. Why did you find that artificial intelligence was able to solve the kinds of needs that other TA technologies could not address?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I'm really excited to be here and spend some time with SteFan. Him and I had the opportunity to work at Postmates, so really excited for today. I think that to your question in terms of AI and talent tech stacks, it's probably one of the most important decisions, if not top two or three decisions, that a talent leader will make when it comes to talent strategy and effectiveness. So I've assessed a lot of tools that are available to talent, many of them being more point solutions versus a platform. So they might solve one or two problems. So for instance, a product like Gem is great for automated outreach. A product like Beamery would be great for candidate support communities and some automated campaigns. LinkedIn Recruiter, we all know and are familiar with, can provide ways to communicate and source. But adding AI to your tech stack adds efficiency and automation in all of these ways, on steroids, I might add. So essentially, AI can perform tasks that require a human for thinking and judgment. So for example, like if you thought of like a task like sourcing, profile assessments, outreach, or even doing intake calibrations and so on, they can all be leveraged with AI, which saves time, saves money, saves resources. And I think the last point that I would make, Steve, is that when you think about AI and then diversity and inclusion, which is extremely important to Granular, as well as the business world in general, up until Eightfold, you had to kind of guess whether a prospect was from an underrepresented group or not. With AI, you know what your D&I metrics are on many levels, even seeing how candidates from underrepresented groups perform at each stage of your funnel versus non-URG candidates. And that's technology that's changed how we measure D&I effectiveness and also to discover any opportunities with diversity hiring.
SteFan, what do you think about this? Were there specific needs that you found you were able to address with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was more about really trying to optimize as much of and produce as much productivity out of our team as we currently had. Coming out of the pandemic and also being part of a hyper growth company, we realized that we really had to get on our game, and hiring recruiters can be and sourcers can be a solution, but trying to get a little bit more out of our current team without necessarily wringing them dry and putting them too much of the ringer was just the most scalable solution. So from our side, we really started to see what could we possibly do to make our recruiters' lives easier, take off the tasks that may have been more menial or potentially have been taking up a lot of time, and allow them to focus their skills on things like recruiters' phone screens, business phone screens, and ensuring that we were continuously having the right talent in the pipeline. So from our side, it was definitely more focused on generating more efficiency while simultaneously also bringing in some more automation.
Well, that's really great, thinking about that efficiency side as well. So given all of these different things that AI can do and all the different ways that it can impact, I want to address this back to Jeff. How do you explain this to your leadership? How do you get them to understand this impact that AI can drive?
Yeah, it's a great question because AI can be such a big and bulky thing. And I think kind of piggybacking what SteFan was saying is right on point. So what I found to really resonate with leadership on AI is really showcasing recruiter efficiency. And being able to do more with less human resources really impacts capacity planning. So many leaders may not know how much activity it really takes to make one hire. So breaking down all the specific tasks at a high level, say in terms of recruiting hours needed per hire, or engineering interview time required to make a hire, and then showcasing the change in efficiencies with AI is an aha moment. So you might ask, well, how can you quantify AI if you don't have it? Well, let me give you one example. So think through the lens of just deleting your sourcing time, or maybe if you have a sourcing component in terms of your headcount plan or organizational structure. With AI, you can simply drop pages of profiles in your ATS and AI sorts them, ranks them based on your criteria. So no more 25 hours per week sourcing to send out 50 LinkedIn in-mails, which might, bring back a 15% response rate. And by the way, with AI, you have direct email addresses to your prospects, not just LinkedIn in-mail messaging. So framing AI through increased output and decreased headcount, which to SteFan's point, increasing efficiency, helps to visualize the dramatic drop in cost per hire and then organizational effectiveness, especially when you're calculating the cost to the business for engineering time that's missed due to interviewing.
Well, that's terrific. So really showing that efficiency, that dollars and cents view that's going to matter to your leadership, Jeff, that's what's gotten you to a yes?
Yeah, I think you have to understand where the pressure points are. And obviously, I think in any business case, especially to the C-suite, you have to be able to demonstrate ROI.
So I want to take the flip side of that, SteFan, and turn it over to you, because the leadership is going to understand dollars and cents. But then part of what Jeff has said is we're going to show how you can do more with fewer headcount. Maybe have each recruiter do more of the high value work with the AI taking some of the things that can be automated away from the need to have a person do them at all. So how do you then explain this to your colleagues in some of these roles that may be impacted, maybe in the talent roles, HR business partner roles? How can you help some of your colleagues also get on board so they can understand why AI can be of value to them as well?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the conversation always starts with listening. You want to understand where the individual is coming from, what attachments they might have to previous processes, and why they have those attachments. So I generally like to start every new technology assessment with understanding what my stakeholders want and where their pain points are. And for me, it's always the pain points that are the most important. I know that's a weird thing to think about, like, pain. We don't want to think about pain so negatively, but if you really focus on what is bothering an individual, it allows you to understand what they want to fix. And then all you need to do is take those attributes, and you can actually build out requirements to help you sell this respective tool that you're trying to bring in. That's kind of my trick to change management. I let people tell me what is going wrong, and then I can connect that to the tool and show them how the tool can make that easier. I think to dive into that a little bit deeper, I think there's also an aspect of helping people understand what life could be like if we make these changes. Sometimes it's hard for you to be able to visualize a future with a process that's completely different to what you're doing. And I would say HR in general does tend to get stuck in this a little bit more because we haven't had the technological revolution as much as some other industries have. And with this now kind of starting to happen in this space, people are worried about compliance. They're worried about biases. They're worried about all these different aspects, which really can, create a lot of fear. So the trick really for there is give them a sneak peek of what the future can look like. Show them, hey, this is where our pain points are. We're not hiring enough people from this particular demographic. And here's how this tool can help you find that. Building that connection and helping them across that logical leap really tends to be the best solution from my perspective.
So you're listening first, and then you're painting a picture of the future. Is that really what works to get people to follow you there?
It's so amazing from when the second you show people, you try to talk something through and they're like, I don't know, it's not going to work for me. I kind of have my way of doing it. And then you show them that I can do exactly what they were doing in 2 clicks. And in honestly, probably about 1/10 of the time that they were doing it for, you've immediately won them over. And the reality is a lot of people are very much attached to things that they don't necessarily want to do, but they just don't realize that freeing those tasks up would allow them to do the things that they really want to, and also the things that they honestly probably stepped into the role for. So that's kind of where I like to focus.
Well, I think that is a great segue to something else I want to ask you about, because now that you've gotten people to buy in, maybe at an emotional level, at a day-to-day level, how do you actually add that up into the business case? So how do you create that business case for a talent intelligence platform specifically, and who bought that business case internally?
Yeah, I think there's a couple components there. One of the first ones that is I'm a big fan of building evangelists and like a coalition of individuals who are supportive of something. Because regardless of really what the ROI comes down to from a financial point, if you have a small army of individuals that are very supportive of it, that gives you a little bit more room for you to kind of figure out the metrics to really generate the ROI. So I think that's usually kind of where I always like build my safety net to start off with. Then from there, working with on the business side, it's really about showing them where the future can be. A lot of times we get so stuck in like, this is the process that broke and this is what we need to fix. But particularly with the organizations that I've dealt with in my past, it's a lot about scaling. And I show them problems that they're not even thinking about yet and how the solution can be better suited for our future as opposed to just the current day. Now, obviously there is, I'm a huge data nerd. I'm pulling analytics from everything and I'm always have something to justify my position. But I think at the end of the day, there's something about, opening up people's perspectives as to what technology can do for talent that generally does a job for me that I don't necessarily need to go to the charts and the graphs as often as I find I might have needed to before.
So within that, within that conversation you're having, is that with a chief human resource officer or HR leader in your organization?
It's everyone across the board. I mean, I believe our stakeholders in talent really are representation of our interviewers, our hiring managers, the business leads from those respective departments, HR, obviously, and then also our candidates. And that's something that, oftentimes does get left out of the technology assessment process is people are still thinking about like what this technology is going to do for them. They're not necessarily thinking about what it can do for the individuals they're really focused on, the candidates. So I like to make it a point to also assess how we're doing from that perspective. Slip a survey at the end of an application, understand what their process was like. And then from that, you can also use that as leverage to, hey, department lead, we noticed that you're struggling to convert people. Here's the feedback we've had about your interview process, about your application process. And here's the changes that a tool can allow us to do as well.
I'd like to turn this over to Jeff as well. So Jeff, who are you making the case to ultimately within the organization? Is it a CHRO or is it another role as well that you also need to get on board with this decision to go with AI?
Yeah, just listening to SteFan, I mean, there's so many things I remember from, a year ago going through this process. But for me, obviously, I think figuring out who the primary stakeholders are is extremely important. And then I think secondly, what I would say is like, who are the true influencers? Because the influencers may not necessarily be the primary stakeholder. So for me, obviously, my boss, the head of people was important to help kind of shepherd me through these waters as, a 3 to 4 month in new employee and kind of help me and who to connect to. And I loved what SteFan said about running surveys. I think like, let me go back, Steve, to kind of the earlier example around capacity planning. You really have to have those discovery talks. And SteFan chose the survey route, which is great to get some unfiltered feedback. And I chose, and which I'm sure he did as well, was really having one-on-one conversations with leadership, hiring managers, recruiters, interview teams, as far as recruiting processes and systems, like to truly understand the state of the union, where the pain points were, to get a holistic view of kind of talent effectiveness. I think once you have this conversation or you kind of execute on these surveys, you can prioritize and frame Eightfold and AI appropriately. One of the major advantages of Eightfold is that it is a platform. As I mentioned, it's not a point solution like a lot of products are kind of in the talent space. So for me, the 3 use cases that I use specifically for the CEO, so my audience happen to be the CEO as well as the SVP of product development, so oversees all the technical hiring. So for me, everything that I was hearing from all of my discovery calls and talks, and then what I'm hearing from leadership, and then obviously my boss, who I trusted her kind of intel, was number 1, slow to build top of funnel. So obviously we all hear that from probably every hiring manager, but that was a common thread. I think number two was too many interviews and too much stress on the interview teams. So our VP of engineering was doing 30 plus hours of interviewing per month. So could you imagine like your head of engineering recruiting doing a full week of interviews every month just to vet candidates that may or may not get hired by us? And then lastly, as we mentioned earlier, the dollar savings and the ROI to the business. I mean, the CEO has a budget. They need to prove out what your tools you're adding to your toolbox and why, and you have to be able to demonstrate that ROI. And for me, that came through cost per hire. So when you know that your cost per hire is well above industry average, we were investing too much in outside resources, and our recruiters were not performing as efficiently as possible. So that common theme of really efficiency and automation. Now I can tell you like those three use cases specifically through AI and Eightfold, with those use cases, I committed to dropping 85% of our agency fees, increasing time to hire by 30%, while also increasing our on-site to offer conversion percentage. And I think like when you pull in all of the information that I discovered from my conversations, I think the most telling stat was that we were only at about 12% of our candidates making it from the on-site stage into the offer stage. And most of us know, like, really you have to be above 20%. And ideally you want to be 27, 33% in that range. That's a really strong on-site to offer percentage. So we went really aggressive. We end up raising our on-site to offer percentage from 12% to the first half of this year, nearly 34%, which is exceeded clearly the goals that I had set. I was hoping to almost double. If we got over 20% in the first half, I was going to be happy, but we clearly blew it out of the water. And there's just so much that I could go into and so many rabbit holes that we could go down. But in general, I think that one stat was probably the most telling on just overall impact of AI. And that was a critical business case in terms of the CEO, as well as the SVP of our product development teams.
That's tremendous. Did you want to add something on there, SteFan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, Jeff has an amazing view on this. The other two metrics I would definitely add to that kind of was helping in the being more persuasive in the conversation were around increasing the collaboration across the organization, and then also decreasing the ramp time for any new resources. So what I kind of mean by those two is, again, our team was growing, and a big focus for us is, if we have this 3-month ramp period for any recruiter to understand the roles, organization, before they can really start generating valued leads, how can we get that down to a month, maybe even a couple weeks? And that's one of those places where the AI really was able to step in, because of the fact that we had this universal language of what a good meant and how we can see that across the board. Because we were setting the calibrations in advance, it almost made it so anyone could quickly jump into the mix and generate leads, because there wasn't as much precedent of us having to go out and know specifically that unicorn we're looking for. We could just focus on getting people into the system and letting the system kind of indicate who we should be focused on and prioritizing. And that also creates a sense of collaboration, because oftentimes you have your G&A recruiters and your business and your tech recruiters, and they don't necessarily work as well together because of the fact that they feel like they have two very different environments. But the tools kind of helped us get around that, because now they can, if they find a lead, regardless if it's good or not, quickly add it to the system, and who knows, it could be the next hire on the tech side of things. So those are the other two kind of pieces I would definitely add in there as well.
I think we've heard from each of you a lot of really interesting insight about how to address each person's interests and their needs and their concerns in order to show them, here is why this is an investment we should make. This is a transformation we should make. So I hope you listening have been taking some notes about what you can do if this is a direction you would like to head, how you can do it like Jeff and like SteFan in order to get AI into your organization. But now I have one more question that I wanted to address to each of you, starting with SteFan, about the questions that you don't answer. So you make this presentation, you make this pitch to your peers, your teams, and to your leadership. There must be some questions that you get. There must be some objections. So what are maybe the one or two most common objections or most significant objections that you heard? And how do you overcome those? SteFan, what do you think?
I think usually the very first objection whenever you bring in AI is induced is this bias and the fear of introducing bias into your existing process. And it's really hard to really kind of avoid that question, because you see situations with like Amazon and other organizations, they're trying to introduce AI, and it's just bringing with it all this, we're bringing more of the same in, which unfortunately is not the representative of the diversity we're looking for. I think for me, the biggest way I've gone around kind of showing people the other side of that is focusing on looking for technology or AI that really is hyper focused on transparency. And one of the things I do see about Eightfold and I love about it, there's no question as to why someone is a 4-star or a 2-star. You can quickly understand from that perspective what's going on. And additionally, I also love the fact that you don't necessarily need to be in a situation where you can blindly trust the AI. You could use it as a tool to help you prioritize. And that's oftentimes where I start out with a lot of companies. You get them to a place where we're in the first 5 months where they are looking at the AI, and the 4 and 5-star individuals are the ones that we get to first, because chances are those are the best suited people. And then also probably the ones with offers in other places. So getting them into a mindset of, all right, let's just use it as a prioritization tool. And then from there, when they realize like, oh yeah, we do find ourselves keep hiring 4 and 5s all over again, they inherently build that trust themselves. And that's kind of the two things that I like to do.
Well, that's really great. So really bias, transparency, trust, and you show how the approach with AI will address them. And then people really experience that. So they'll realize you were telling them the truth.
I mean, I think there always is that part of, when is it going to go wrong? Everyone kind of has that fear of like, oh no, when has it, have we officially done it? But I think that's also where I love that level of transparency, because, these technology, particularly Eightfold in general, is an AI solution, but it's an AI solution that's very heavily leaned toward creating diverse cultures. And with that comes like the diversity dashboard, which gives me the power to be able to say, all right, AI, what are you actually doing? What does my pass rates look like? What is it? Are we ensuring that we're creating as much diversity through our in our respective roles as possible? So in addition to just having this ability to kind of prioritize, I also have this ability to check myself and make sure that we're not heading too far the other direction.
Well, same question now for you, Jeff. What is an objection or the most common objection that you would get, and how do you address that?
Yeah, I think, probably the most common or a common is just, why do we need it? Why do we need to change? And I think you have to really examine in general people's tendencies to not want to change and to kind of stay with status quo. So proving out a solution that's really cutting edge, that's something that's really new, that people really haven't had exposure to, can be daunting. And nobody wants to be kind of the first in or one of the first in before it's really been tested and proven. So I think helping people to really understand, and how I was able to do that is really pulling people in at the beginning of the process. So instead of me making the business case, instead of me being the only, cross bearer for Eightfold or a new technology or anything that you want to do in your technical stack, I really pulled people in to see demonstrations from the company, to be able to ask their questions and get past their objections, to be able to talk about it internally. So as we're doing the vetting process, I think having everybody on the same side of the fence is really important. And what I mean by that is there's difference. There's a difference when me as a talent leader is standing in front of leadership and my team saying, we need this, we need this, we need this, as to when I'm in the room with them as we're watching the demonstrations and hearing the objections firsthand, and them being able to ask their questions. And what that gets you to is really the why behind it. So when you start flushing out these random objections and you kind of get to the root cause of what you're seeing, was really my team was a little adverse to change. But once they're able to see, to SteFan's point earlier, how it can really change your time management, your behaviors, and your skill set, it's pretty remarkable. I think the other thing that I would say is just as you get them involved in this process, it's really important to keep them engaged from the boarding and kind of the vetting of the process all the way until you actually have the tool. So the time investment and the change management's real. And I think you have to identify that and really understand your specific objections and your organization and kind of the path to success.
Well, Jeff, SteFan, you both have been great change leaders, and I thank you for it. We all thank you for it. And thank you for listening and enjoying this conversation with two talent leaders today.